A rich man, owner of a famous city betting arena, plans to use his most fierce horse to get rid of his autistic daughter. But the cruel plan to expose the fragile girl against the animal known for its aggressiveness turns into a scene that no one could predict. When a majestic white horse that has always protected the child heroically jumps into the arena. What happens between the two horses and the girl left everyone speechless. The rain beat against the mansion windows like desperate fingers trying to get in, creating a melancholy symphony that echoed through the luxurious corridors. In the third-floor bedroom, Helena Davis shivered beneath thin blankets that seemed unable to warm her. Her 75 years had never weighed as heavily as on this cold winter night, when each breath was a battle against the fever consuming her frail body. Her white hair, once neatly styled with dignity, now clung to her sweaty face, stray strands dancing with every restless movement of her head. Her eyes, usually bright with wisdom accumulated over decades, were glazed over by the high temperature that made her body tremble uncontrollably. Her hands, marked by age spots and prominent veins, clutched the edges of the blanket as if it were her only connection to a reality that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. "Ricardo," she murmured, her voice hoarse, trying to call for her son, whom she knew was somewhere in the house. The word came out as a broken whisper, carrying decades of unconditional love and a desperate plea for help. "Please, my son, I need to go to the hospital." Downstairs, Ricardo Davis adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie in front of the foyer mirror. His 45 years had been kind to him, dark hair only slightly graying at the temples, lending him a distinguished air that perfectly complemented his tailored suits. He was a man who had learned to use his appearance as a business tool, every gesture calculated to convey power and control. The faint sound from the floor above reached him, but Ricardo showed no sign of haste. Instead, he checked the gold watch on his wrist, a gift he'd given himself after closing a particularly lucrative deal. The urgency in his mother's voice was merely another inconvenience in his perfectly organized schedule. "Darling, did you hear your mother?" Isabella Davis's silky voice echoed down the marble staircase. She descended with the practiced elegance of someone who had spent years perfecting every move to impress high society. Her 38 years were maintained through expensive treatments and a skincare routine that consumed hours of her day. "Gee, she's making that noise again." Ricardo turned to watch his wife, noticing how she spoke of his mother with the same tone she might use for a misbehaving pet. Isabella had always made it clear that she considered Helena an unnecessary burden, a relic of a simpler past that didn't fit with the luxurious lifestyle they had built together. "It's just a fever," Ricardo replied, his voice carrying a coolness that didn't go unnoticed. "Old people get sick. It's natural." Upstairs, Helena tried to push herself up from the bed, but her legs failed her. The world spun around her, colors and shadows blurring in a nauseating dance that made her squeeze her eyes shut. Yet, the dignity that had accompanied her throughout her life didn't entirely abandon her. She knew she needed medical help, but she also knew she depended on her son's goodwill to get it. "Ricardo!" This time, her voice carried more force, fueled by the desperation of someone feeling life slip through their fingers. "Please, my son, I can't anymore." The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Helena closed her eyes, tears mingling with sweat on her face, as she felt the cold of loneliness penetrate deeper than any fever. Somewhere in her muddled mind, a small voice whispered that something had irrevocably changed in her relationship with her only son. Ricardo, downstairs, looked at Isabella with an expression she knew well. It was the same look he wore when he was about to make a particularly risky business decision. "You know what needs to be done," Isabella whispered, approaching her husband with feline steps. Her perfectly manicured nails slid across his suit lapel, a seemingly affectionate gesture that carried a subtle threat. We can't keep wasting money on endless treatments. She's lived long enough. Don't you think? Ricardo felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't from fear, it was from excitement. Isabella's suggestion echoed dark thoughts he had been nurturing for months. His mother's deteriorating health had become a constant drain on his finances, and worse, a source of social embarrassment. How many times had he lied to friends about why they weren't traveling anymore, about why they had a nurse at home on weekends? "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked, though his voice betrayed that he already knew the answer. Isabella smiled, that calculated smile she used when she was about to get what she wanted. "Accidents happen, darling, especially with elderly, confused people. A rainy night, a medical emergency, the panic of the moment." She paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air like sweet poison. Oh, who could blame a dedicated son if something terrible happened on the way to the hospital? Upstairs, Helena had managed to drag herself to the bedroom door. Every movement was agony, but her survival instinct propelled her forward. Her trembling hands touched the cold doorknob, and for a moment she allowed herself a shred of hope. Perhaps, if she could just make it downstairs, she could make Ricardo understand the gravity of her situation. "My God," she murmured, her voice lost amidst involuntary groans of pain. "Please give me strength for one more day." The faith that had sustained Helena through decades of hardship, the premature death of her husband, the financial struggles to raise Ricardo alone, the silent sacrifices she had made to ensure he had every opportunity, this same faith now became her only companion in the growing darkness of her despair. Ricardo slowly ascended the stairs, each step echoing through the house like a countdown. When he reached his mother's room, he found her leaning against the doorframe, trembling so hard she could barely stand. For a split second, something akin to compassion flickered in his eyes, a distant memory of the boy who had once run into this same woman's arms for comfort. "Mother," he said, his voice adopting an artificially concerned tone, "you shouldn't be out of bed. I'll take you to the hospital right now." Helena looked at her son through the haze of fever, and for a moment her heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you, my son," she whispered, allowing him to help her back to bed. I knew you wouldn't abandon me." Her words were like daggers in Ricardo's chest, but he forced a reassuring smile. "Never, Mother. You know I'll always take care of you." As he helped her into light clothing, inappropriate for the cold night, though she didn't notice in her delirious state, Ricardo felt his heart harden with every lie that left his lips. Isabella appeared in the doorway, observing the scene with barely disguised satisfaction. "I'll get the car," Ricardo announced, his voice sounding oddly loud in the room's silence. "Mother, try to rest a bit while I get everything ready." Helena nodded weakly, closing her eyes and murmuring a silent prayer of gratitude. She couldn't imagine her son was praying too, but for something entirely different. Ricardo was praying for the courage to execute the plan taking shape in his mind, a plan that would make this rainy night the last time anyone would see Helena Davis alive. The sound of the rain intensified, as if nature itself was setting the stage for what was to come. The black Mercedes slid silently out of the garage, its headlights cutting through the darkness like sharp blades. Ricardo adjusted the rearview mirror, observing his own reflection, eyes that would soon no longer recognize the man behind them. In the back seat, Helena was bundled in a thin blanket, her irregular breathing creating small clouds of vapor in the cold air. "Are we going to St. Francis Hospital?" she asked, her voice weak, trying to orient herself through the rain-streaked window. Even in her weakened state, something in her maternal instinct picked up the tension emanating from her son's stiff shoulders. "Yes, Mother," Ricardo lied, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "It's the best hospital in the area. You'll be fine." Helena closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of relief. For weeks, she had felt her body failing, each day bringing new symptoms that frightened her, the persistent fever, the growing weakness, the pains that seemed to come from everywhere at once. All of it made her feel as if she was slowly fading away. But now, finally, her son was doing the right thing. "I remember when you were little," she murmured, her voice thick with feverish nostalgia. "Every time you got sick, I'd spend whole nights by your side, caring for you. You were so afraid of doctors." Ricardo felt a lump form in his throat, but he forced himself to ignore it. He couldn't allow himself to remember those times. The young mother who worked 2 jobs to pay for his medical consultations, who sold her own jewelry to buy the medicine he needed, who slept on the floor beside his bed when he had nightmares. "I need to make a quick stop," he said abruptly, turning the car onto a secondary road that led away from the city lights. "A doctor friend lives nearby. He can take a look at you before we go to the hospital." Helena tried to process the words through the haze of fever. Something didn't seem right, but her confused mind couldn't pinpoint what. The road was growing darker and darker, the city lights disappearing behind them like stars extinguishing one by one. "Ricardo," she said, her voice carrying a note of growing anxiety, "this isn't the direction of the hospital. I remember. We used to drive through downtown when we went to your father's appointments." "Things have changed, Mother," he replied, his voice sounding strangely distant. "There's a faster way now." But Helena wasn't foolish. Even in her debilitated state, 75 years of life had taught her to recognize when something was terribly wrong. Her eyes fixed on her son's profile in the darkness, trying to find there the boy she had raised with so much love and sacrifice. "My son," she whispered, "please tell me the truth. Where are we going?" Ricardo didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had closed completely, and all he could do was keep driving down the road that led to the densest forest in the region. The rain intensified, as if the sky itself was crying for the betrayal about to be consummated. The car turned onto a dirt road, tree branches scraping against the windows like ghostly fingers trying to stop what was happening. Helena began to tremble more violently, not just from the fever, but from the primordial fear that was beginning to take hold of her maternal heart. "Ricardo." Her voice was now a desperate whisper. "My son, what are you doing?" In the silence that followed, only the sound of the rain beating on the windshield witnessed the moment a mother finally understood that the son she had loved unconditionally her entire life was about to destroy her. The car stopped abruptly in a dark clearing, surrounded by ancient trees that seemed like silent sentinels witnessing a crime against human nature. Ricardo turned off the engine, and the silence that followed was broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the vehicle's roof and Helena's labored breathing in the back seat. "Why have we stopped here?" she asked, her trembling voice revealing the growing terror that gripped her heart. Even through the fever that clouded her thoughts, the maternal instinct that had protected her for decades now screamed alarms in her mind. "Ricardo, this isn't a doctor's house." Ricardo remained motionless for long seconds, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as if it were a life preserver. In the rearview mirror, he could see his mother's eyes, eyes that had watched him take his first steps, that had shone with pride at his graduation, that now stared at him with a mixture of confusion and fear that churned his stomach. "The car broke down," he said finally, his voice sounding artificial even to his own ears. "I'll have to step outside to see what happened." Helena tried to rise in the seat, her movements weak and uncoordinated. "No, my son, don't leave me alone here. Please, let's go back home and call a tow truck." But Ricardo was already out of the car, leaving the door open for the cold rain to invade the vehicle's interior. He walked to the back door with steps that seemed to belong to someone else, each movement a struggle against the voice of conscience screaming in his head. "Come, Mother," he said, helping her out of the car with a kindness that was a cruel parody of filial care. "You need to get out for a bit. The fresh air might help with the fever." Helena didn't have the strength to resist. Her bare feet touched the cold, wet ground, and she clung to her son's arm like a scared child. The rain immediately soaked her light clothing, making her tremble even more violently. Her white hair clung to her face, and she had to struggle to keep her eyes open against the drops falling relentlessly. "Ricardo," she pleaded, "please, take me back to the car. I'm so cold." He guided her a few feet away from the vehicle to a small rise covered in wet leaves. Each step was a torture for both of them, for her, physically, for him, emotionally. When he finally stopped, Ricardo looked down and saw his mother trembling uncontrollably, her clothes clinging to her fragile body, her lips blue from the cold. "I'll go get help," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Stay here, don't move." Helena lifted her eyes to her son, and in that moment, through the haze of fever and despair, she saw the raw and terrible truth reflected on his face. There was no broken car, no doctor friend, no help coming. There was only a son who had made the most unthinkable decision a mother could imagine. "You're not coming back," she whispered, the words coming out as a painful realization, not a question. "You're leaving me here to die." Ricardo couldn't answer. He couldn't look her in the eyes. Instead, he turned and began to walk back to the car, each step echoing like a gunshot in the silent forest. "Ricardo!" Helena's scream pierced the night like a blade. "My son, please, don't do this to me." But he continued walking, the sound of the engine starting muffling the desperate screams of the woman who had brought him into the world. The car's taillights disappeared among the trees, carrying Helena's last hope with them and leaving her alone in the merciless darkness of the forest, with only the icy rain as her companion in her final moments of consciousness. The silence that followed the car's departure was more deafening than any storm. Helena remained motionless for long minutes, her body trembling violently, as her mind struggled to process the impossible reality of what had just happened. The rain continued to fall relentlessly, each drop like a tiny ice needle piercing her skin, already sensitized by the fever. "Ah, he'll be back," she muttered to herself, her voice lost in the night wind. "My son wouldn't do this to me. He's just scared. He'll come back." But as the minutes dragged on and no headlights appeared among the trees, the terrible truth began to solidify in her heart like ice. The boy she had cradled through nights of nightmares, whom she had fed with the little money she could earn, whom she had defended against all of life's adversities, this very boy had abandoned her to die alone in the forest. Helena tried to take a few steps toward the road, but her legs gave out and she fell to her knees in the cold mud. The impact sent waves of pain through her already debilitated body, and she had to support herself with her hands on the soaked ground to keep from fainting completely. Her fingers sank into the wet earth, mixing with rotting leaves that exhaled the damp smell of decay. "God," she whispered, lifting her face to the dark sky, letting the rain wash away the tears that streamed down her cheeks. "Why? What did I do wrong?" The question echoed through the forest without an answer, lost among the branches swaying violently in the wind. Helena had always been a woman of faith, someone who found comfort in prayer even in the most difficult moments. But now, alone and abandoned by her own son, her faith seemed as fragile as her sick body. She tried to stand again, using the trunk of a nearby tree for support. The rough bark scratched her delicate palms, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the emotional agony that ripped through her chest. Each breath was a monumental effort, her lungs fighting against the cold dampness that penetrated through her soaked clothes. "I need to find help," she said aloud, trying to give herself courage. "I can't give up. Not like this." Helena began to walk slowly through the forest, her bare feet slipping on the mud and stumbling over unseen roots. With each step, she felt as if the ground were moving beneath her, a dangerous combination of high fever and extreme exhaustion. The trees seemed to lean in toward her, their branches reaching out like arms trying to hold her. The sound of her own labored breathing mingled with the night sounds of the forest. Owls hooted in the distance, small animals rustled among the bushes, and the wind created an unsettling symphony that made every shadow seem like a threat. Helena had never felt so small, so vulnerable, so completely alone in the world. "Ricardo," she called again, her voice breaking on the word. It was no longer a cry of anger or despair. It was the lament of a mother whose heart was being shattered by the most unthinkable betrayal. "My boy, why?" Her knees gave out again, and this time she didn't have the strength to get up. Helena curled up on the wet ground, hugging her knees in a pathetic attempt to warm herself. The fever consuming her created hallucinations. For moments, she saw her deceased husband's face among the trees, heard the laughter of young Ricardo echoing through the forest. Consciousness began to slip through her fingers like water, and Helena felt a strange peace descending upon her. Perhaps this was how things were meant to end, alone, but with her dignity intact, without having to witness more of her son's cruelty, a son she had loved more than life itself. Through the haze of semi-consciousness, Helena first heard hooves. The rhythmic, heavy sound approached slowly, mixing with the drumming of the rain into an almost hypnotic melody. For a moment, she thought they were more hallucinations from the fever, perhaps ghostly riders coming to claim her for the other world. But then, a warm, damp breath touched her icy face, and she forced her eyes open. What she saw stole the little breath she had left. A magnificent white horse stood beside her, its silvery coat gleaming even in the darkness of the rainy night. The animal was immense, with defined muscles that suggested strength and speed, but its eyes were what struck her most. There was a deep intelligence there, a compassion Helena hadn't seen even in her own son's face. "Are you real?" she whispered, extending a trembling hand toward the horse's velvety muzzle. When her fingers touched the animal's warm skin, a wave of relief washed over her. It was real. She wasn't completely alone anymore. The horse lowered its elegant head, allowing Helena to stroke its neck. The gesture was so gentle, so full of compassion, that tears streamed down the elderly woman's face again. For decades, she had cared for others, first her husband, then her son, always putting their needs before her own. Now, finally, something was caring for her. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. The horse responded with a low, musical whinny, as if it understood every word. With extreme care, the animal lay down in the mud beside her, its warm body offering protection against the cold wind and relentless rain. Helena dragged herself closer to the animal, allowing its warmth to heat her. For the first time in hours, the shivers began to subside. The horse remained absolutely still, only its deep, steady breathing indicating it was awake and alert. It was as if it instinctively understood that the elderly woman beside it was fighting for her life. "Do you have a home?" she murmured, running her fingers through the animal's silken mane. "Someone must be worried about you in this storm." As if responding to her question, the horse carefully stood up, taking care not to destabilize Helena. It walked a few steps toward the heart of the forest, then returned, looking at her with obvious expectation. The message was clear. It wanted her to follow. "I can't walk," said Helena, her voice thick with frustration and despair. "I can barely stand." The horse seemed to consider this for a moment. Then, in a demonstration of intelligence that left Helena gaping, it approached her and lowered itself, folding its forelegs in a clear indication that she should climb onto its back. "You want to carry me?" she asked, incredulous. "But I haven't ridden in years. And I'm so weak." The animal waited patiently, its gentle eyes fixed on her with an expression that seemed to say there was no rush, that it would stay there as long as needed. With an effort that drained her last reserves of energy, Helena managed to drag herself to the horse's side and, with its help, climb onto its back. The movement was surprisingly smooth. The horse rose slowly, allowing her to adjust and find her balance. Her hands gripped the thick mane. And for a moment, she felt like a child again, free, protected, safe. "Where are we going?" she whispered, but the horse had already begun to walk through the forest with careful, measured steps. Helena closed her eyes and surrendered to the experience, feeling the rhythmic movement of the animal beneath her like a lullaby that calmed her. For the first time since she was abandoned, a small flame of hope began to ignite in her wounded heart. The horse walked with a determination that suggested intimate knowledge of the terrain, its hooves instinctively finding the safest paths through the dark forest. Helena clung to its mane, floating between consciousness and delirium, occasionally whispering words of gratitude that were lost in the night wind. With each step of the animal, she felt as if she were being carried away, not only from the place she was abandoned, but from an entire life of disappointments and betrayals. Through the haze of fever, she began to notice a faint light shining between the trees ahead. At first, she thought they were more hallucinations, but as they approached, the light became more defined. It was a lit window, emanating a golden, welcoming glow that contrasted dramatically with the hostile darkness of the forest. "A house," she murmured, her voice a mixture of surprise and relief. "Someone lives here." The horse stopped before a rustic yet well-kept cabin built of dark wood that seemed to have withstood decades of weather. Smoke curled from the chimney, creating ghostly spirals that disappeared into the rain. It was an unlikely refuge in the middle of nowhere, as if it had sprung from the forest itself to offer shelter to the lost and desperate. The cabin door opened before the horse could even whinny an announcement of its arrival. A man with graying hair and a face etched with the wrinkles of experience emerged, carrying a lantern that cast golden circles of light into the darkness. His movements were those of someone accustomed to emergencies, quick but controlled. "My God, Storm," he said, approaching the horse with obvious familiarity. "What have you brought home this time?" When the lantern light illuminated Helena, the man was visibly shocked. She was pale as a ghost, her white hair plastered to her face by the rain, trembling uncontrollably as she clung to the horse's mane, as if it were her only connection to life. "Mom, what happened to you?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "How did you get here in this state?" Helena tried to answer, but the words refused to come. Instead, she just looked at the man with eyes that pleaded for help, for compassion, for anything but the cruelty she had experienced in the last few hours. The man didn't hesitate for a second. "Let's get you out of here," he said, approaching carefully. "My name is Dr. Gabriel Mendez. I'm a veterinarian, but I studied human medicine too. I'll take care of you." With practiced movements, he helped Helena dismount the horse, supporting the full weight of her body when her legs failed completely. She was surprisingly light, as if the illness had consumed not just her strength, but her physical substance as well. "Storm, you did the right thing bringing her here," Gabriel murmured to the horse, which followed them both to the cabin door. "Go to the stable and dry yourself off. I'll take care of her." The cabin's interior was a fascinating blend of rustic charm and medical sophistication. Wooden shelves displayed both old books and modern veterinary equipment. A fireplace crackled merrily, spreading warmth and golden light throughout the space. The scent of medicinal herbs mingled with the aroma of homemade soup, creating an atmosphere of healing and welcome. Gabriel carefully placed Helena on a sofa near the fireplace, covering her with thick, dry blankets. His experienced eyes were already assessing her condition: the high fever, signs of hypothermia, severe dehydration. "I need to know what happened," he said gently, kneeling beside the sofa. "But first, we'll take care of you. You'll be all right. You're safe now." Helena closed her eyes, tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, someone had spoken to her with genuine kindness. She wasn't a burden. She wasn't an inconvenience. She was a person who deserved care and compassion. Gabriel worked in silence for the next few minutes, his experienced hands checking Helena's vital signs with the precision of decades of medical practice. Although his specialty was animals, the fundamental knowledge of the human body remained ingrained in his memory. Helena's temperature was dangerously high, her blood pressure too low, and there were clear signs of severe dehydration. 103.1 degrees Fahrenheit, he murmured, reading the thermometer with concern. "Ma'am, how long have you had this fever?" Helena tried to answer, but her throat was so dry that only a hoarse whisper emerged. Gabriel immediately fetched a glass of warm water, helping her drink small sips while gently supporting her head. "Slowly," he said, his voice carrying the patience he had developed over years of caring for injured and frightened creatures. "There's no rush. You have all the time in the world." As the water eased her parched throat, Helena was finally able to speak. "A week," she whispered. "Maybe more. I lost track of time." Gabriel frowned, concerned. A high fever maintained for so long could cause irreversible damage, especially in someone Helena's age. He rose and went to a makeshift medicine cabinet, returning with antibiotics and fever reducers. "I'm going to give you some medicine that should help," he explained, carefully preparing the doses. But I need to know more about your condition. Were you receiving medical treatment?" The simple question triggered a wave of emotions in Helena. Her tears returned, but this time they weren't just from physical pain. They were tears of a wounded soul who had finally found someone willing to listen to her story. "My son," she began, her voice breaking on the word that had once carried so much love and pride. He said he would take me to the hospital." Gabriel sat in a nearby chair, his gentle expression encouraging her to continue. There was something in the way he looked at her, without judgment, without haste, just with genuine compassion, that made Helena feel she could trust him. "Instead, he brought me into the forest," she continued, each word ripped from her throat like shards of glass. "He said the car had broken down and he was going to get help. But he never came back. He left me there to die." The silence that followed was filled only by the crackling of the logs in the fireplace. Gabriel remained motionless for long seconds, processing the magnitude of the cruelty he had just heard. He had seen many cases of animal abandonment over the years, but this was something that defied his understanding of human nature. "Your own son did this to you?" he asked, his voice laden with disbelief and contained anger. Helena nodded, closing her eyes as if she could block out the painful memory. "I raised him alone after his father died. I worked 2 jobs to pay for his education. I sold my jewelry to buy his medicine when he was sick. And he—" Her voice broke completely. Gabriel stood up abruptly, walking to the window where he could see Storm in the stable. The horse had saved this woman not only from death, but from the deepest betrayal a human being can experience. The irony was not lost on him. An animal had shown more humanity than her own son. "You are safe now," he said, turning back to her with steely determination in his eyes. "As long as you are under my roof, no one will be able to hurt you, not even your son." Helena looked at him with gratitude that transcended words. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." Gabriel smiled, an expression that completely transformed his time-worn face. "And because it's what we do when we still have humanity in our hearts. We look after each other." He picked up an extra blanket and covered her with paternal care. "Now rest. The medicine will start taking effect soon, and you need sleep to recover. I'll be right here." For the first time in weeks, Helena allowed herself to relax completely, knowing she was truly safe. Morning arrived gently at Gabriel's cabin. The first rays of sunlight filtering through the linen curtains and creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. Helena awoke slowly, her mind clearer than it had been in weeks. The fever had subsided considerably overnight, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was floating between worlds. Gabriel was in the kitchen, preparing an aromatic soup that filled the cabin with comforting scents of herbs and fresh vegetables. His movements were economical and precise, revealing years of solitary life where each gesture had been refined by necessity and practice. "How are you feeling?" he asked, noticing she had woken up. His experienced eyes already assessed her appearance. Color had returned slightly to her cheeks, and her eyes were no longer glazed over by the fever. "Better," Helena admitted, her voice still weak but much clearer. "Much better. Thank you for taking care of me." Gabriel brought a bowl of soup and sat beside her, helping her position herself to eat. "It's the least I can do. Storm rarely brings visitors home. He must have seen something special in you." As if hearing his name, the magnificent white horse appeared at the window, its noble head tilting to observe Helena. She smiled upon seeing him, extending a hand which he gently touched with his muzzle through the open window. "He's extraordinary," she said, stroking the animal's silky face. "How did you two meet?" Gabriel's face softened with a mixture of affection and melancholy. "I found Storm 5 years ago, when he was just an orphaned foal lost in the forest. His mother had been killed by hunters, and he was alone, scared, nearly starved." Helena watched the interaction between man and animal, noting how Storm responded to Gabriel's tone of voice with subtle ear movements and small whinnies of acknowledgement. "I cared for him, healed his wounds, and expected him to leave when he was strong enough," Gabriel continued. "But he chose to stay. He became my companion in this self-imposed solitude." "Self-imposed solitude?" Helena asked gently, sensing there was a deeper story behind the words. Gabriel fell silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on something distant beyond the window. "I lost my wife 6 years ago. Cancer. I fought to save her with all the medicine I knew, but..." He paused, swallowing emotions that still ached like open wounds. "When she died, I felt I had failed at what mattered most in life." Helena extended a trembling hand and touched his arm, a simple gesture, but one laden with understanding. "You didn't fail. Sometimes, loving someone means being present through the pain, not necessarily preventing it." Her words touched something deep within Gabriel. It was the first time in years someone had spoken about his loss without offering empty platitudes or trying to minimize his pain. "That's why I came here," he said, "to escape the memories, the people who wanted to comfort me with words that meant nothing. Storm was the first being I met, who didn't try to make me forget my pain. He simply stayed by my side." Helena nodded, understanding perfectly. Sometimes animals understand what we need better than humans do. Storm chose that moment to let out a low, musical whinny, as if agreeing with the observation. Helena laughed, a soft sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did Gabriel. "It's been a long time since I laughed," she said, marveling. "I didn't know if I still could." "Laughter comes back," Gabriel assured her, "as does strength, as does hope. It takes time, but it comes back." For the rest of the morning, they talked about their lives, sharing stories that revealed the depths of their respective solitudes. Helena spoke of the years spent raising Ricardo, of the sacrifices she had made gallantly, of the slow process of realizing her son was becoming a cruel stranger. Gabriel, in turn, shared memories of his wife, Clara, of how they had dreamed of retiring to this very cabin, of how he had fulfilled both their dreams alone, carrying her memories as both a blessing and a curse. Storm remained close throughout their conversation, like a silent guardian who understood that both humans under his care were healing not just physical wounds, but also the deeper scars of the soul. As Helena recovered in the safety of Gabriel's cabin 10 miles away, Ricardo Santos was playing the role of his life before an audience none the wiser. The police station was bustling that Tuesday morning, with experienced investigators listening intently as the well-dressed businessman reported his mother's disappearance. With tears he had rehearsed in the bathroom mirror. "She was delirious with fever," Ricardo said, his voice trembling in just the right measure, not too much, lest it seem theatrical, not too little, lest it sound indifferent. "She insisted she needed to go to the hospital immediately. As a good son, I didn't hesitate to take her." Detective Marcos Ferreira, a 50-year-old man with graying hair and eyes that had seen every kind of lie throughout his career, took careful notes. There was something about Ricardo's behavior that bothered him, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. "And what happened during the trip?" Ferreira asked. Observing the businessman's facial expressions closely, Ricardo dabbed his eyes with a silk handkerchief, a studied gesture he had practiced to convey controlled vulnerability. She started getting more and more agitated in the car. She was saying nonsensical things, trying to open the door while I was driving. I had to stop a few times to calm her down. Isabella, seated beside her husband in a strategically placed chair, held his hand in a public display of marital support. Her eyes were dry, but she had applied a slight reddish tint around them to simulate recent tears. "The poor woman was always very stubborn," she added in a melancholic voice. "In recent months, her mental condition had deteriorated significantly. Sometimes she didn't even recognize Ricardo." The lie left her lips with frightening ease. Isabella had spent years perfecting the art of social manipulation, and this performance was no different from the many others she had given at charity dinners or high society gatherings. "When we arrived at the hospital," Ricardo continued, "she refused to get out of the car. She was screaming that I wasn't her son, that I was trying to hurt her. People started looking at us." He paused calculatedly, feigning composure before continuing. "I tried to convince her for almost an hour. Finally, she got out of the car. But the moment I turned to speak to a nurse, she vanished." Detective Ferreira frowned. "Vanished? What do you mean?" "She simply disappeared," Ricardo said, his voice carrying just the right amount of desperation. "A 75-year-old woman with a high fever in full mental confusion, lost in the city during a storm. We searched for hours, questioned everyone in the area, reviewed security footage. In reality, Ricardo had spent those hours at home, showering to get rid of the smell of mud from the forest and destroying the clothes he had worn during the abandonment. The searches he mentioned were entirely fictitious. "We've already initiated searches in the hospital area," the detective informed him. "We've also alerted all the hospitals in the region in case someone finds her and brings her in for treatment." "I'm very grateful," Ricardo said, shaking the detective's hand with calculated force. "My mother is all I have in the world. I don't know what I would do if something happened to her." After leaving the police station, Ricardo and Isabella walked silently to the car. Only when they were alone, with the doors closed and far from prying ears, did they allow themselves to smile. "You were perfect," Isabella said, adjusting her makeup in the sun visor mirror, "especially the part about her not recognizing you. It explains any odd behavior witnesses might have observed." Ricardo started the engine, feeling a wave of satisfaction course through his body. Now it's just a matter of time. In a few days, when they find no trace of her, they'll assume she died from exposure during the storm. Case closed. They drove through the city streets, passing posters Ricardo had had printed in the early morning. "Wanted, Helena Santos, 75 years old. Missing." His own photo smiled back at him from the lampposts, a cruel irony that made him feel as though he were driving through a graveyard of his own making. What Ricardo didn't know was that, at that very moment, his mother was laughing softly in Gabriel's cabin, watching Storm play with butterflies in the garden, more alive and happier than she had been in years. It was the third day at the cabin when Gabriel decided to examine the soaked bag Helena had carried the night Storm brought her home. He had placed it to dry near the fireplace, hoping they could salvage some personal belongings that would help her feel more at home during her recovery. Helena was in the backyard, sitting in a rocking chair Gabriel had improvised, watching Storm graze peacefully under the morning sun. Her strength had gradually returned, and though she still felt frail, there were no longer any signs of the fever that had nearly killed her. The fresh mountain air and Gabriel's dedicated care had worked a small miracle. "Helena!" Gabriel called from the cabin doorway, his voice carrying a strange note she couldn't quite identify. could you come here for a moment? She rose carefully, still moving with the caution of someone who had been on the brink of death just days before. When she entered the cabin, she found Gabriel seated at the kitchen table, some documents spread out before him. His expression was a complex mix of shock, anger, and something that seemed like disbelief. "What is it?" she asked, approaching slowly. "Did you find something in my bag?" Gabriel looked up at her, and Helena saw that his hands were trembling slightly. "Helena, you said your last name is Santos, correct?" "Yes," she replied, confused by the sudden formality in his voice. "Helena Santos? Why? And your son, Ricardo Santos, he's a businessman here in the region." Helena's heart leaped at hearing her son's name spoken with such intensity. "Yes, he is. How do you know that?" Gabriel picked up one of the documents, an ID card that had dried overnight, and examined it carefully. Helena Santos, mother of Ricardo Santos, the wealthiest man in this town. The same Ricardo Santos who is in the papers today, desperately searching for his missing mother. He stood up and went to a stack of newspapers he had bought in town that morning, spreading them across the table. The headlines screamed in large print, "Businessman offers reward for missing mother. Helena Santos, the search continues. Devastated son pleads for information." Helena looked at the pages with growing horror. There was Ricardo's photo, tears streaming down his face in an expression of anguish she had never seen, because it was completely false. Beside it, her own photo from a few years ago, when she still smiled often. He's pretending to look for me," she whispered, her voice broken by the realization of the betrayal's magnitude. Gabriel read one of the articles aloud. "Businessman Ricardo Santos, inconsolable, declared yesterday that he will spare no effort to find his mother Helena, 75, who disappeared during the trip to the hospital. She is all I have in the world," Santos said, offering a reward of $100,000 for information leading to the lady's whereabouts. The silence that followed was deafening. Helena sat heavily in a chair, her hands covering her face as she absorbed the cruel reality of what her son was doing. Not only had he abandoned her to die, but now he was using her disappearance as a public performance to gain sympathy and admiration. $100,000, she repeated bitterly. "That's the amount he's willing to pay to find me, but he wouldn't spend $100 to take me to a real doctor." Gabriel approached her, his anger at her son mixing with compassion for the pain he saw etched on her face. "Helena, I know your son by reputation. Everyone in the region does. He's known for his coldness in business, for doing anything for profit, but this—" He paused, struggling to find adequate words. "This is monstrous." Helena looked up at him, and Gabriel saw that her tears had dried, replaced by something he hadn't seen before, a steely determination that completely transformed her expression. "He thinks he killed me," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "And he thinks he can carry on with his life as if I never existed, receiving condolences and sympathy for being a wealthy orphan." She stood up, walking to the window where she could see Storm. The horse raised its head as if sensing her presence, its intelligent eyes meeting hers through the glass. "But I am alive," she continued, a new resolve dawning in her wounded heart. And he's going to find out he completely underestimated the woman who brought him into the world. Gabriel watched the transformation happening before his eyes. The frail, broken woman Storm had brought home was disappearing, replaced by someone who had found strength in the deepest betrayal a human being can experience. Behind the window, Storm whinnied softly, as if approving of the change he saw in his charge. The phone rang at 6 in the morning on Thursday, waking Ricardo from a restless sleep. In the past few days, he had slept better than he had in months, free from the burden of worrying about his ailing mother. But something in the insistent tone of the ring made his stomach clench with an inexplicable anxiety. "Mr. Santos," the voice on the other end of the line belonged to Carla, his office secretary, but there was an urgency in it that immediately put him on alert. I'm sorry to wake you so early, but we received a strange call a little while ago. What kind of call? A man said he might have information about your mother. He didn't want to give details over the phone, but insisted you needed to go in person to a property in the Greenwood region. He just left an address. Ricardo hung up the phone with trembling hands. Beside him, Isabella was still asleep. Her hair spread elegantly across the silk pillow. For a moment, he considered waking her, but decided it was best to investigate alone first. If his worst suspicions were confirmed, he would need time to formulate a new strategy. An hour later, Ricardo was driving down the road leading to Greenwood, his Mercedes cutting through the morning mist like a silver bullet. His hands were sweating on the steering wheel as memories of the rainy night returned with brutal clarity. He could picture perfectly the spot where he had stopped the car, where he had helped his mother out, where he had left her shivering in the icy rain. The address led him to a discreet entrance marked only by a rustic mailbox. A dirt path snaked through dense trees before emerging into a clearing where a cozy-looking wooden cabin stood. Smoke rose from the chimney, and there was a small but well-kept stable at the back. Ricardo stopped the car and remained seated for a few minutes, trying to control his rapid breathing. If his mother were there, if she were alive and had told someone what he had done, his entire life would crumble like a house of cards. The cabin door opened before he could decide whether to knock or flee. A man with graying hair emerged, his eyes fixed on Ricardo with an intensity that made him feel like an animal being studied by a predator. "You must be Ricardo Santos," the man said, his voice filled with a coldness that contrasted with his gentle appearance. "I'm Gabriel Mendez. Thank you for coming." "You said you have information about my mother," Ricardo asked, stepping out of the car with stiff movements. "Please tell me you've found her. I'm desperate to know if she's all right." The act came automatically. Years of business meetings had taught him to control his facial expressions, regardless of what he felt inside. But Gabriel didn't seem impressed with the performance. "Oh, she's fine," Gabriel said, a cold smile curving his lips. "Very fine, considering her own son abandoned her in the forest during a storm." Ricardo's world stopped. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the man who had just destroyed his life with a single sentence. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice betrayed the panic seizing every fiber of his being. "You don't know?" Gabriel took a step closer, and Ricardo instinctively recoiled. "Then let me refresh your memory. A rainy night, a week ago, a sick mother begging for medical help, a son who takes her not to the hospital, but into the middle of the forest, where he abandons her to die like an animal." Each word was like a punch to Ricardo's gut. His legs began to tremble, and he had to lean against the car to keep from falling. Where is she?" he whispered, his mask finally falling completely. "Safe," Gabriel replied. "Far from you, and ready to tell the whole world what kind of monster you really are." At that moment, Ricardo Santos understood that the nightmare he thought had ended was just beginning. "I want to see her," Ricardo said, his hoarse voice revealing the desperation he tried to hide. "If my mother is really here, I need to explain. I need to make her understand. It was a misunderstanding." Gabriel let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the clearing like a crow's caw. "A misunderstanding? Is that what you call abandoning a 75-year-old woman, sick and delirious with fever, in the middle of a forest during a storm?" Before Ricardo could respond, the cabin door opened again. Helena appeared in the doorway, leaning on a makeshift walking stick Gabriel had made for her. Her appearance was drastically different from the last time Ricardo had seen her. Her hair was clean and styled, her skin had regained a healthy color, and her eyes shone with a strength he had never noticed before. "Mother!" Ricardo exclaimed, rushing towards her with open arms, genuine tears, born of fear, not relief, streaming down his face. "Thank God you're all right. I looked for you everywhere. When you disappeared from the hospital, I thought I had lost you forever." But Helena raised a hand, stopping him before he could touch her. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with unconditional love, now stared at him with a mixture of deep sadness and steely determination. "Stop," she said, her voice carrying an authority Ricardo had never heard before. "Stop the lies. There is no hospital, no desperate search, no misunderstanding. There is only a son who decided it would be more convenient if his mother died." Ricardo froze, his mask of the devoted son dissolving completely before the direct accusation. "Mother, you were delirious. You don't remember correctly." "I remember everything," Helena interrupted, taking a step forward with the help of the cane. "I remember you promising me medical care. I remember the road that didn't lead to the hospital. I remember you abandoning me in the icy rain, saying you would come back, knowing perfectly well you wouldn't." Behind her, Storm appeared, positioning himself beside Helena like a silent guardian. The horse fixed his intelligent eyes on Ricardo, and there was something in that gaze that made the businessman instinctively step back. "And I remember," Helena continued, her voice growing in intensity, 25 years of raising you alone. I remember working 2 jobs to pay for your education. I remember selling my jewelry to buy your medicine. I remember sleeping on the floor beside your bed when you had nightmares, promising I would always be there to protect you. Each word was like a blade cutting into Ricardo's soul. He found himself confronted not only with the monstrosity of his actions, but with the magnitude of the love he had betrayed. "Mother, I can explain," he began, but his voice broke. There is no explanation," Helena said firmly. "There is only a choice you made, and there are consequences for that choice." Gabriel approached, holding a thick envelope. "Yesterday afternoon, I accompanied Helena to the police station. She told Detective Ferreira the whole truth. The security cameras on the main road confirmed that you passed by there that night, heading towards the forest, not the hospital." Ricardo's face paled completely. "Yao, you can't prove anything." "We can prove everything," Gabriel said calmly, "including the fact that you knew exactly where your mother was throughout this entire desperate search charade. The cameras also show you returning alone 2 hours later." Helena took another step towards her son, and Ricardo saw that the frail woman he had abandoned had transformed into something much stronger and more dangerous, a betrayed mother who had found her voice. "I'll give you the same choice you gave me," she said. "You can publicly confess what you did, return all the money you spent on your fake search, and perhaps, just perhaps, I will consider not pressing criminal charges." "Or," Ricardo asked, though he already knew the answer. "Or you can continue lying," Helena replied, "and find out what it's like to face the full legal consequences of attempted homicide by abandonment, public fraud, and whatever else the lawyers can find." Storm whinnied softly, as if approving of Helena's words. The sound made Ricardo realize he had lost not only his mother's respect, but also his own humanity. Finally, surrounded by the truth and with nowhere to flee, Ricardo Santos fell to his knees in the mud, sobbing like the frightened child he had once been in the arms of the woman he had just destroyed. 6 months later, autumn painted the forest in golden and red hues that danced gently in the afternoon breeze. Helena sat in the cabin garden, her skilled hands working on a crochet blanket as she watched Storm play with an orphaned foal Gabriel had rescued the previous week. The sound of their cheerful laughter mingled with the horses' whinnies, creating a symphony of contentment she had never imagined possible. The transformation in her life had been as complete as it was surprising. After Ricardo's public confession, broadcast live on local television during a press conference that shocked the entire region, Helena had become a respected figure in the community. People came from far and wide to hear her story of survival and rebirth, seeking inspiration for their own struggles. "How are you feeling today?" Gabriel asked, approaching with 2 cups of herbal tea he had prepared. At 60, he had found a new reason to smile every day. and the solitude that had consumed him for years had been replaced by a companionship that valued every shared moment. "Free," Helena replied, accepting the tea with a smile that lit up her entire face. "For the first time in decades, I feel truly free." Gabriel sat beside her on the wooden bench they had built together, one of the many improvements they had made to the property during their months of cohabitation. The cabin now housed not only two lonely hearts that had found mutual comfort, but also a small sanctuary for injured animals that Gabriel continued to treat with Helena's enthusiastic help. "People in town still talk about the case," Gabriel said, watching Storm patiently teach the young foal to balance. "Ricardo lost almost all his business contracts. His reputation will never recover." Helena nodded, but there was no bitterness in her eyes. He made his choices. Just as I made mine, I chose to forgive, not for his sake, but for mine. Carrying anger would be like drinking poison, hoping someone else would die. The legal process had been resolved out of court. Ricardo had confessed publicly, returned all the money spent on the fake search charade, and established a substantial fund for the care of abandoned elderly people. Isabella had filed for divorce the day after the confession, taking half of the remaining assets and disappearing from both their lives. "You know he comes here sometimes," Gabriel said carefully. "He stays at the entrance of the property, just watching. He never approaches, but I know," Helena replied softly. "Storm always lets me know when he's there. The poor man is trying to find a way back to being the boy I raised, but some paths cannot be unmade." Storm approached them, as if he had heard his name. The magnificent white horse had become more than a savior. He was a member of the family, a living symbol that compassion still existed in the world. Helena stroked his silky muzzle, remembering the terrible night when he found her lost and near death. "You changed my life," she whispered to the animal. "You both changed my life." Gabriel took her free hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that had become natural over the months. They were not young. They didn't have decades ahead of them, but they had learned that true love is not measured in time. It is measured in depth, in mutual care, in moments of shared peace. "There's a letter for you," Gabriel said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From the state capital's Elder Protection Association. They want you to be the spokesperson for the national campaign against family abandonment." Helena smiled, but shook her head gently. "My fight has already been won. Now I just want to live each day with gratitude, care for our animals, and perhaps help other elderly people who arrive here lost and scared." The sun began to set, painting the sky with gold and orange hues that reflected in Storm's eyes. Helena stood up, still leaning on the walking stick Gabriel had made, but now it was more a symbol of independence than of weakness. "I'm going for one last ride with Storm before it gets dark," she said, walking towards the horse that immediately lowered its head to facilitate her mount. Gabriel watched her carefully climb onto the animal's back, her movements fluid despite her age. Together, woman and horse headed for the forest trail, the same forest that had once almost been her grave and was now her Eden. As they rode slowly through the trees, gilded by the setting sun, Helena felt a deep peace fill her heart. She had lost a son, but gained a true family. She had faced death and found a new life. She had discovered that it is never too late to start over when you have people or animals who truly care. Storm stopped in a clearing where wildflowers grew in abundance. Helena dismounted carefully and knelt to pick a bouquet, not for a grave, but for the kitchen table where she would dine with Gabriel that evening, celebrating another day of life, love, and renewed hope. The forest that had witnessed her greatest betrayal was now witnessing her greatest victory. The discovery that true wealth lies not in what we have, but in who truly loves us.